All right, hello and welcome. Thank you for falling victim to the clickbait of problems with paragraphs. Everyone loves paragraphs, and now everyone loves to hate paragraphs. So you put that in your title, you're guaranteed at least to get a few people to come and listen. So yeah, my name's Hawkeye Tenderwolf. I'm a senior developer at Lullabot, and I live in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And it's a lovely, lovely place. And I live in a group house with 6 other people, and we're having one room open up soon, so we'll have 8 people in the house. If anyone's looking to move to a lovely, lovely town, come stay in the it's not a commune exactly, but it's
Mike's coming for pizza.
What?
Mike, no, he's in the number of people.
Oh. Yeah. All right. So yeah, that's me, and this is what we'll talk. Oh, I also just want to preface this by saying that the design of these slides is really high tech and amazing. I had my primary laptop crash yesterday, so I redid the presentation very quickly on this backup one, which didn't have Wi-Fi access on Linux for the first. I eventually did get it working, but most of this was created without Wi-Fi using LibreOffice. So yeah. So it looks like a circa 2005 kind of slide deck, but yeah. So we'll talk about how we got here to the point where, with the prevalence of paragraphs and some of the underlying principles that make it not work so well. Then we'll talk about why it doesn't work so well and how it's causing problems. Talk about mitigation strategies, which sounds, use some SAT vocabulary words there, and just looking at ways we can get around some of the biggest problems with paragraphs, but kind of doing it from a sideways approach where we're not really solving a problem, we're just trying to make it hurt less. And then we'll talk about Richfields, which it has some promise in terms of actually providing a potential solution. And then if anyone is still left in the room, we'll have Q&A and discussion. Okay, so first just want to start off by saying that my talk was inspired by this guy's talk, Japerry. He's an architect or something at Acquia, and he gave this talk called Entity References Gone Wild, How Relationships Can Sync Your Project. And he's giving it also at Drupalcamp Seattle, so I highly recommend you if you're not sufficiently scared by the end of my presentation, then please go watch his, and you will be terrified about using paragraphs. And and he's also giving it at Seattle, so go watch it there. It's an important topic and problem that we need to solve in the community. All right, good morning, guys. So, how did we get here? I also want to emphasize that the problem is not necessarily with paragraphs itself. It's a problem with entity references and field API and the way that our data is structured and the fact that we're using a relational database in Drupal to manage this stuff. So put all these things together, and field collection had almost the same problems as paragraphs does. Paragraphs is just so much more successful and does things so much more powerfully that the problem really becomes exacerbated and raises its head. So part of my reasoning for this presentation is also some atonement for my paragraphs evangelization of yesterday, of years past. And so I used to be a big panels guy. I've been doing Drupal for maybe 6 or 7 years or something like that. And I came in right around the switch between 6 to 7 and immediately saw panels as like, this is awesome. This is what I'm going to standardize on. So pretty much built all my sites through all the various ecosystem that Chaos Tools and panels provided. Mini panels and panels everywhere and Panelizer and all of that. Those really fun site building tools, super powerful. But right around that time, the time I changed employers, I saw that there was a really big shift going on, and that the themer was retiring. The concept of having one person to do the entire front end and also tie it into the Drupal backend, but those people were getting really hard to find because the complexity of Drupal was increasing and people were becoming more specialized, and we needed to find another way to work. And so what happened is that component-driven design came along, and we started working from the front back rather than the back to the front. It used to be that I, as a backend developer, could just use panels to spit out a whole bunch of disgusting markup onto the page. But it would all be there, and so I would throw it over the fence and say, "Hey, themer, haha, sucks to be you. You get to make it look pretty," and they would just hate their lives, And so, but what we started doing instead was the front enders would say, "Hey, we're going to create all this beautifully crafted markup. It's going to be so elegant and clean, and then we're going to hand it off to you and tell you have to make Drupal talk to it, right?" So it kind of flipped the table a little bit, and. So right around the time, a few years ago, I was moving to a new employer, and I said, we're throwing panels out the door, standardizing on paragraphs. And I came in as an architect, I basically table flipped and said, this is what we're doing, it's going to be awesome. And it was okay. There's some really great things about paragraphs. The user experience is not one of its strengths, the user experience of editors trying to edit nested paragraphs, but that's a different story. We're not talking about that today. And so part of this talk is just atoning for my past sins of evangelizing this paradigm so hard and contributing to the ecosystem a lot. And it's a powerful, wonderful tool. It still has a place in the ecosystem. We just need to reevaluate the way it's being used and use it more responsibly. Okay. And like I said, it's not necessarily a problem with paragraphs itself. It has to do with the underlying architecture of Field API, the way we do entity references in Drupal, and the fact that we're using a relational database just makes us have a bad day. Okay, so problems with paragraphs. We'll just talk about these two big ones right here, but there's a whole bunch more. Like I said, I highly recommend you go watch Jacob Perry's talk. And he will, scare the heck out of you. And we won't get into too much of the details because I want to focus more on the solution and the Richfields stuff. So, but just briefly, the problems with paragraphs are database load. So, revisions are a wonderful thing, and with field collection. Everyone familiar with field collection? Yeah, okay. So wonderful little module. It was kind of the precursor to paragraphs. And why does it exist? It exists because in Drupal 6 we had the Multifield module and we had CCK, and it was very easy for the field API was less robust. It was had a lot less complexity, and it was actually easier to kind of shove fields together and make them live in the same field, in the same database table. Drupal 7 came along with Entity API and Field API and all this wonderful, these rich, powerful tools, but it inherently made it difficult to do something like Multifield. So we said, well, let's use field collection. We'll have a sub-entity that's fieldable. We'll put fields on that. We'll embed it in the node form. Boom, problem solved. Now, field collection did not support revisions. And that's where the seismic shift happened, is that the paragraphs community wrote entity reference revisions. What that allowed paragraphs to do suddenly is to have a history, to have a revisioning history, just like all the regular fields on your node. So you can revert revisions, you can go back in time, you can support translations, all that kind of stuff that previously you couldn't do with field collections because the field collection was a separate entity with its own revisions and or its own single revision and didn't support multiple. So the big problem with revisions is that when you save a node and no data has changed, right? Let's say you just edit the node form and you push save. Let's say you have 10 fields on your node. How many new database rows get created? You change nothing. You need 10 fields.
10?
Yeah. 11 or something, 10, 11, somewhere around there.
I'm doing that.
Probably 11, but I'm not sure. So yeah. But the idea is it's not 0 like it should be, right? So it has to go through, and when it saves a node, it runs through well, we'll get to form API stuff in a minute, but it has to create a new row. And how many tables are those 10 rows spread across? 10. Yeah. Right answer. Yeah. So each field exists as each field table has the entity ID that it belongs to, and it has the field value and maybe a language. So it's got like 2 or 3 columns in it. That's your typical field table, right? And so when you save an entity, when you save a node, it goes through if it has 10 fields on it, it goes through those 10 tables and adds a new row to each of them with the exact same data as the row before it. So that's retarded, but it's how it has to work right now. And I created this kind of core issue to just kind of start a conversation. It's a terrible idea that I proposed. It's not going to work, but I was just trying to get creative about how do we solve this problem, and we don't have a good answer right now. It's really not. This really isn't going anywhere. So the underlying issue of revision bloat is not going away. So what happens is you end up very quickly, especially on sites with paragraphs where you have a nested entity with fields. One of those fields is a nested entity in itself, which has fields, ad infinitum. It quickly gets out of hand, and you can end up with databases that are several gigs large and sites that crash when you clear caches and things like that. So that's more on the end user experience of site crashing, and then on the architecture side of the database. But for the editor experience, we also have problems. I have a friend who works at Red Hat, and I worked with her on some really neat panels enhancements back in the day, and then we each got into paragraphs and ended up working at separate companies, but stayed in touch. And so she's doing a lot of paragraphs in component-driven design at Red Hat. And they built out this amazing, incredible design system with support from Phase 2, and they have landing pages with paragraphs. So they have bands going across the page like this, and then inside that they have, I forget what they call it, they have their own terminology like tabs or something like that. And then in each tab you've got you can have a CTA or some sort of featured content. Then sometimes inside of those you have another paragraph with like an extra link that gets added onto it or different things, because they needed modularity. They're a large organization, and they saw a need for that paragraphs could solve. And on paper it does. It's elegant, it's beautiful. They define all their components in YAML, and then they have a process that runs that just converts all of their components into paragraph types. And it's super powerful and beautiful. When you look at the editorial experience, it's insane. It's they wrote their own custom admin theme just to kind of try to improve it a little bit and make it a little bit more usable. But when you have entities within, paragraphs within paragraphs within paragraphs, it becomes very hard for an editor to even just navigate, know exactly what's going on. And furthermore, when you go to save that page, let's say it's a large landing page with, 15, 20, 30 bands on it. Inside of each one of those is, 5 tabs. Inside of each one of those is a 2 or 3 CTAs. You end up with hundreds of entities on a single node form. Hundreds. And so when you save that, Drupal has a really, really robust form API and validation and the ways that it saves the entities. It's all so pluggable and wonderful, but they're expensive processes. And so it wasn't built to handle saving 900 entities on a single form. And so they'll just time out. I think they've had to turn off the PHP time limit on their servers where they're editing, just so they can push save and let it run for 5 minutes, so that it'll finish saving the form. It's nuts. So because each single one of it has to traverse the entire tree, and like I said, even if nothing changes, if you just go in and change the title of the node and you push save, it's creating a new revision of all 300, 600, 900 entities on the page, and new rows in each field table. So these are the problems with paragraphs and with entity reference revisions, and like I said, that's about as much detail as I'm going to get into. But I highly recommend you watch this guy's presentation. Let me go ahead and pull it up real quick so you can take a snapshot if you want. This is his talk from Drupal GovCon, and he goes into some more details. So if you're not convinced, Jacob Perry's your man. Okay, so let's talk about where do we go from here? What can we do to make this better? Well, I've been fighting against the WYSIWYG for most of my career. I hate it. I want structured data. It's more elegant. It's cleaner for me as the back-end developer. It's nice and neat. I can see the structure of the data in the database, and I can write views to query it. When everything is just dumped into a WYSIWYG, it's very hard to, you can't do any of that. That's why I use Drupal pretty much and not WordPress or anything else, among many other reasons. But what embedding content in a WYSIWYG does is that it removes the entity reference field from the equation. So at the moment, if I've got a WYSIWYG toolbar, and everyone familiar with the entity embed module for Drupal 8 and stuff like that? Yeah. So you can create a button in the WYSIWYG that lets you embed a node, a block, pretty much any entity. Actually, there's some problems with blocks, I think. But you can embed pretty much any entity type that you want. And you can choose the view mode that it gets rendered with, and it's pretty cool. It's nice, nice feature. It's kind of moving in that idea is more in the direction of the Gutenberg project from WordPress. Anybody familiar with Gutenberg? It's just like a really awesome, amazing editorial experience that creates a whole bunch of really nasty markup and shows it in the body field. And that's how WordPress makes their pages now. But it's got a great user experience, so it's hard to knock it too hard. Same thing with Layout Builder. Layout Builder is still an experimental module in Drupal 8, but the idea here is that when you when you reference entities in these two tools, you're not using an entity reference field. So when you save the form, it's not resaving those entities, and it's not resaving the fields within those entities and the sub-entities and yada, yada, yada. So it just cuts off the tree right there. Now that has some problems of its own. It becomes much harder to do things like track entity usage and determine dependencies between nodes, between entities. But we're just talking about ways to make things hurt less. So this can be a better solution in some cases, where you're just simply putting, embedding an entity in the WYSIWYG or by a layout builder. Another thing that can help is turning off revisioning. That, for most sites, that's just a non-starter. Because they want to be able to revert things. They want to, use content moderation. And there's also other considerations like internationalization and translation. So yeah, but if you don't absolutely need revisioning, it can help. It helps with. So the first one helps with form saves and just reducing the number of saves that happen on the node form, and it also thereby helps reduce the number of rows in the database. Revisioning isn't going to help the form experience and the user experience, but it is going to help with the database bloat. Similarly, the breaks module is a module that came along maybe about 2 years ago or so after paragraphs already had a lot of steam, and it can actually be built on top of paragraphs now. It can be built on top of many different entity types, but the idea is that in order to create the structure of the data you want, rather than having nested entity references, Bricks creates a visual, a table with, I forget what it's called, but basically a table where you can nest items inside the table to produce the structure of the data that you want. So if you have a parent paragraph type, and it's made up of, if it's a band or whatever, and you can have a CTA inside of it, and then inside of that you could have another entity, and so they're nested visually rather than using a hard entity reference, and that has the same effect as the first solution, embedding in a WYSIWYG or something like that, because you are not having to traverse as many entity references, and but it's not as good as the first one because you're still having to save each of those sub-entities each time the form gets saved. All right. It's just, and feel free to throw questions at me at any moment. Happy to entertain
Third question. What is a CTA?
Yeah, sure. It's a call to action, so it's a common term. It's so hard to name things on the front end, especially. People use the word tout, or there's vigorous debate about how to name these front end components. But yeah, sometimes some people will just call a link the CTA, but and the component around it is something else. Yeah. All right, so let's move into the fun stuff. Now, let's talk about Richfields, which is pretty much just another name for the multi-field, or a quote-unquote compound field where you have a single field made up of smaller ones. And I won't go into details about how to create your own field in Drupal 8. There's a really good explanation. It's the core issue I was talking about before. But on Drupal.org, there's pretty good documentation on how to create your own custom field type. The basic gist is that there are three parts to it. You have the field type, or the field item, which defines the sort of basic, what type of data is it storing. You have the field formatter, which determines how the field gets displayed to the end user on node view. And then you have the field widget, which is for the backend editors when they're creating content. And that controls the widget that gets used to allow them to input the data. So yeah, there's this documentation on Drupal.org and any number of blog posts out there to help you along. But so the okay, so let's just jump into some of the demo, and we'll look a little bit at the code, and then we'll look at how it looks in practice. But a little bit of background first, I guess, on what led me to this point is that I was working on a client project, and we saw a need for repeatable chunks of data within a piece of content. So on a node, we had a need for a link and a description, repeatable any number of times. And we thought about using, I probably suggested paragraphs and was immediately slapped down. But then we ended up using what we called micro content for some of the more complex things that we couldn't build with custom fields. And micro content for us was just built using regular old nodes that we would embed, and we would allow references to them in places where we needed, very complex, repeatable chunks of content. So on this particular project, we're still using this sort of sub-entity model. By the way, calling them nodes instead of paragraphs does not help anything. It doesn't solve any of the problem. Like I said, paragraphs is not the problem. The entity references. So, but there were some very simple, repeatable chunks of content that we identified early on. Like, hey, we can avoid having the overhead and the mess of another entity, an entity reference, and nesting, and separate forms, and all that goes along with that, and just create a custom field for it. So basically, we identified any of these chunks of content that we needed to either embed someplace or that we needed to repeat on a node form. Any of them that had 2 fields or less in them, we just decided to make into our own custom fields. So the normal way to do that, like I said, is you define the field type, you define the field formatter, you define the field widget, and you sort of have to do a lot of work by hand. There's some sort of starter code out there that will help you, but you have to write, the configuration forms for all 3 of these by hand. And I wanted to get around that. I didn't want to, because we had several of these different types. So, loving to over-engineer things the way I do, I decided to work on this Richfields approach. Now, it's not quite ready for contrib. Eventually, I wanted to be able to support more than just 2 fields, and to have a UI around it so that site builders can use it. Right now, it still requires a lot of code and developer knowledge. But the idea is that I wrote a module that allows you to combine any 2 arbitrary fields into one, including fields which already have 2 of their own subfields, like links and things like that. All right, so let's take a quick look. So this is the custom module that I wrote. It's called Richfields, and we're in the source directory. We're looking at the field plugins, and these are our 3 types. We have field formatters, field types, and field widgets. And the way that I wrote some of this, we're not going to get deep into the code or anything, but I will flash some stuff up on the screen. But we're using PHP traits to provide that repeatable functionality across all these different field types. So this is the sort of the base trait that exposes a lot of the functionality. It's all of the functions, all the functionality that was in common to all 3 of those plugin types: the widgets, the formatters, and the field types. Yeah.
Make it a little bit bigger, please.
Absolutely. Thank you. How's that?
That's good. Much better.
Cool. All right. So inside the field type plugins folder, you can see that this is the base trait for all the. So this holds all the code and the methods in common for all of our field type plugins, also called field items. So you can see these are all the different kinds that we're combining. So we've got a email with string item. So a string item, if you look at we'll look at an example in a minute, but a string item is just a plain text field, right? So no unformatted text. And then the email is, of course, the email field. So we're combining a bunch of these together. And here's an example of one. This is the rich link with text long item. So this is combining the link field with the text long secondary field. So in order to implement a new rich field, all you have to do is extend the field, the field type that you're wanting to be the primary field, and then you specify the machine name of the secondary field. So like I said, this is still very, developer centric, doesn't have a UI around it, and I hope that by putting this presentation on the calendar, it would sort of force me to get that done before today, but did not happen. All right, and if anyone wants a closer look at this stuff later, I'd be more than happy to share and go over it and see how it works. And let's jump over to the field widget directory. So you can see there's a few more items in here, and that's because you can have any number of widgets and any number of formatters for a given field type. So we have here rich link with string text field. So that is the link widget with a plain text widget attached to it, and that can be used with the corresponding field type. We also have rich link with text area widget, text areas for the long text fields. Yeah.
I'm using like class inheritance. Is there like intention behind creating this like primary secondary relationship rather than just like a field and fields on the same equal level relationship?
Wonderful question, and I was debating whether to talk about that a little bit. In the rewrite, we'll be doing away with that sort of primary and secondary field thing, so that, like I said, ours was our use case for this project was we only needed to mash two different field types together. So I specifically wrote it to minimize the amount of code I would need to re-implement, and by making one field the primary and extending its parent class, we got a lot of things for free that I didn't have to sort of re-implement and make work across the board. So it was kind of a convenience thing at the time, but won't work, long term for the overall implementation. But yeah, good question.
When you do that, is there a reason there's just two field listed right now, or it's just
It was just arbitrary.
that's what you needed?
It's what the client was paying for,
Yeah.
and I couldn't.
Theoretically, you could
I-
combine as many as you wanted.
I started down that. That when I initially started over-engineering the shit out of it. I wanted to do that. I started, and it's hard. I think I have other ideas now of how to solve it, but it is really hard. And so I was like, I can't make the client pay for this, and so I just switched to this, which simplified things a lot. And since the project has the developer resources to just throw some new classes in there anytime we need a new type, that was the sort of compromise we went with.
Have you tried to file uploads yet? As one of the
No, I don't think so.
I've seen somebody try a similar compound field, and the AJAX mechanism on the form itself was very problematic.
Yeah, I bet.
Just the concept of a linked image as a compound field.
Yeah, I bet that gets pretty gnarly. There's some really seriously complex fields out there. So my gut is that it's going to, when I initially release it, it's going to work okay for like. There'll be a list of like, okay, this works fine for these field types, but it's going to have some really long issues to deal with some of the more complex ones. Any other questions? All right, so this is the field widget instance, and again, we're just extending the parent, and this is just kind of like an in-between class. If we look at the rich link widget itself, I have no idea if I'm still on Wi-Fi, or if it's still working. Let's see here. Yeah, not so much. Stop playing on your phones, everybody. So the rich link widget itself is just extending from the standard link widget from core, and then then we specify the machine name of the secondary widget, and voila. And we'll look at how this actually looks on the site in a moment. This is the trait which holds all of the functionality that's in common to all of our Richfield widgets. And then we get to the field formatters. And again, we've got a few more formatters than we do field types because you can see we started off with a rich link download with text default formatter, and then we ended up needing our own formatter for to display file fields, or to display link fields, not file fields, and to where it would obfuscate the URL of the file, but still allow people to download it. So we just came along later and created a new formatter really quickly. It just takes a few minutes to pump out this boilerplate code, and voila, we had a new formatter in place for this Richfield. And again, we've got the, this is the rich link download with text default formatter. And then we have the trait, which holds all the common functionality for our formatters. All right, so let's look at it. So this is a content type called link collection, and there's a field on it called links, and links is a Richfield. Let's see if the Richfields table will come up. I don't have anything working locally because this is a backup computer, but
You want to hop on my hotspot?
we can try it. For some reason, I don't know if it's like
Yeah, the internet.
Linux on here.
Went on my hotspot.
I turned on my hotspot too, and like this computer wouldn't connect to it. I don't know why. Tried 2 different hotspots, but we can try yours.
It's up to you.
It's a mobile mic.
How about we do it at the end?
Okay.
And thank you. Appreciate it. So, but anyways, this is just the fields settings form for the links field, and you can see it's got a link field in it, which itself is a combination of 2 field values, and then we have the link description. So this is the so how many columns will be in this field table? I don't have anything to give away, but
5?
yeah. Well, maybe with languages 6.
Yes.
Yeah. Right. That's the basic idea, is that you have the entity, the ID of the entity to which this field belongs. You have a field, or you have a column in the table for the URL value. You have a column in the table for the link text, and then you have the WYSIWYG. This is a rich text field, or whatever you call it, where it says a formatted text field. So it itself has 2 fields. It has the text inside the WYSIWYG, and then it has the text format. So there's actually 4 different pieces of data being stored in one database. 4 different pieces of data in one table. That's crazy. So it's basically getting back to using relational databases the way they were meant to be used, and have more than 2 columns in it. So yeah, that is the field settings. And you can see you can have any number of items in it. Oh, hey, look at that! I love it. So yeah, so the field name is field rich links, and it's a link plus text formatted long field. And let's look at the widget now. Yeah, so here's the widget, and I meant to preload the settings form here. But you can see the name of the widget is link with link it plus text area multiple rows. So it's just pulling the names of the parent widgets. So it gets a little bit verbose sometimes. And you can see that it's got the separate settings for each of the subfields. So you've got the link it settings for the link it widget on the edit form, and then you have the edit form settings for the text area. Similarly, on the field formatter, we have, there are no settings, I guess, for the text default formatter. So there's just have the settings for our custom. This is our custom field formatter that we wrote for the project, and it has those settings on it. And on the node form, let's do a little live demo here and see if this actually works. All right, so let's make a link to go to just the home page, maybe. Go to the node. There we go. And we have, I don't know if that's link it or some custom functionality that we wrote that just automatically fills in the title when you reference an existing node. I didn't even know we had that. That's awesome. Yes. Okay. And let's go ahead and add one more. Let's try a different community URL like that. I don't know if that actually works. And let's leave the description blank and see if that is allowed. Oh, by the way, one other thing you can do on the field settings form is change the labels for the fields. So down here, you can see you have a label for the overall link field and then a label for the description field. And you have all the settings for those two subfields. All right, so let's save this and see what blows up. Oh my God, look at that. Okay, so links. We've got the Googs with the link description. We have the second link with its link description, and then we have front page link, which is displaying the field label even though the field is empty. So bugs and things to work out. But I think we just turned off field labels entirely, actually, on this field. So yeah, that's the gist of my live demo. And so yeah, that's it. Thank you. Questions, concerns? Yeah.
You see that sweet database table you were talking about? That
I don't, because I don't have my local up.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that this Tugboat instance I have here. Mike, do you know if Tugboat has like PHP MyAdmin or anything turned on? No, sorry.
No, see, I don't like the base.
I could probably SSH in and run a SQL query maybe, but who knows how to do that?
You can do that. Actually, if you get access to the Tugboat dashboard, it'll give you the login, like a
SSH little window there.
yeah.
Right.
You can do that right now. It'd be a cool demonstration of Tugboat. Tugboat is a free tool that Tugboat or that Lullabot supplies. Like there's a page here, but it's free to sign up. So what it does is it generates a pull request based on it generates a preview environment, like a full environment based on every single pull request by default. And then you can log into the dashboard and you can get this right here, and you should be able to type in there and run your MySQL stuff. I'm guessing the MySQL is probably just like root or something like that.
Oh, what just happened? I need to turn off Vimium and shit. I remember doing this once before. Turn off some plugins that don't work so well.
Color scheme is just confusing me.
Yeah.
What plugins do you have?
How do I turn off Vimium for this site? Okay, we're just gonna turn it off for now.
I don't see a prompt. I'm not sure.
Oh, let's try this. Yeah. I know you can use this for SSH, but yeah, I don't see a prompt in here right now.
Yeah, it's here in the log. Hold on. There should be.
Oh, that's the preview
I
log.
can't see your thing. Something over here. A way where you can type.
Terminal. How about that? Come on, guys. What the hell? All right, let's see here. So, do we have Josh? All right, cool. Actually, we should probably use the. Who freaking knows where this stuff's stored? Yeah, it looks good. All right, so vendor, no. Where's like the composer stuff? I guess we can try to use the global Drush, but This is weird. Is this the site? I don't know. This is the site. No, okay, this is not our site. I don't know what that is. This is some other random, like, vanilla Drupal thing. Yeah. Any ideas? Like, where would...
Yeah, I never do this.
What's some other common locations where people store websites on Linux? www. Web.
I mean, I guess it could be in your user folder.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. We've got a super badass like DevOps guy. He probably has it all obfuscated and hard to get at. Anyways, I'll work on this, and maybe later I can show you the thing, and I'll upload it to the presentation page. Okay. Any other questions, concerns? Yeah.
So as a paragraph starts to die on your site, right? Like, does it give warning signs, or is it kind of like a black and white thing, or when you just like just kind of?
It'll give warning signs. Like the warning signs will be the nodes, the node forms just take a really long time to save, or they'll take longer and longer to save. The size of your database will grow and grow and grow and grow. So if you're exporting it, trying to import it to your local, it'll take a long time.
Is there a threshold to look out for, like when you cross a certain gigabyte, or if you see like a increase rate?
No, not really in an arbitrary way. It really just depends on because it's not a problem to have SQL databases in the gigabytes of data like that. That's okay, but it depends on your site. If you have a site with like 50 pages on it and you have a 60 gig database, it's like what's going on, Yeah, but I would recommend watching Jacob Perry's talk. He goes into more detail about that kind of stuff, like about the problems and what to watch out for and stuff like that.
Yeah, I watched it before.
Yeah.
I went to your link and watched it.
Yeah, he's an entertaining guy too. All right, cool. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Turn off the
Aha.